Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is CJ. Well, guys, the time's finally arrived to put an end to the JBJ. Now, of course, I wouldn't feel right doing this without some kind of recap and review, especially, with it being 2 years of trials and tribulations and, all kinds of experiences that I've been able to share with you guys. So we're going to cover that this vid, and we're also going to cover, the breakdown and, pricing and selling and eventual decommission of this tank. So let's go ahead and get to this update. We got a lot to share. When it comes to this hobby and in life in general, if you ever get a chance to have a do-over, you never want to make the same mistakes twice. And I say that because that's the main purpose of the JBJ. It was my second chance, to have a reef tank and to try to redeem myself from that catastrophe or that failure of my 37-gallon marine land reef that I had before this. Guys have been following me long enough. You know what I'm talking about. If not, go back and check that playlist and you'll see exactly what I mean. So with that being said, two things I wanted to make sure I did right off the bat was dip all my corals and keep my tank pest free. Definitely accomplished that. Over 2 years, never had an aptasia, flatworm, red bug, or any kind of pest outbreak in my tank. I'm really happy I was able to accomplish that. Now, another major goal I set for myself was to try to keep better track of my parameters. Have to admit, my first reef tank was a lot of winging it. I don't think I ever checked for my alkalinity, maybe once or twice over that whole time. And I never really invested in test kits for that system. So with this tank, I started off with API test kits, trying to do better, set a better example and, test my tank regularly. But I didn't realize at the time, I still wasn't there yet. So if I can do it different, I would have invested more money in test kits and test equipment before purchasing corals and then buying the test kits later. It's kind of one of those things, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? In this case, I would say the egg comes before the chicken. Invest in good test kits before you buy corals, livestock. That way you can actually get an accurate feel for your tank as far as your parameters, your nitrates, phosphates, and all those things that are important to maintaining a reef tank. So, if I was to start this tank over, better test kits would definitely be the way to go. Now, the last major mistake I made on my tank that I vowed to never repeat was going to be changing my lights up. And by changing not the settings, but I mean the actual lighting unit itself. The first reef switched from the 160 watt cheap, Chinese black box LEDs, which they were actually working great. But I fell for the trap of getting a lesser light with better features, and my corals paid the price. So, this tank picked a light that was a value, price and budget within my budget. And these Ocean Revive T247 LEDs definitely, did a fantastic job. Didn't have to mess with them, set them and forget them. And they did a great job growing my corals and keeping things alive and just overall, creating a successful reef tank. So now that I've mentioned my lights, let's talk a little bit about the other equipment on my tank. I kind of went back and forth between different methods of flow. Started with the Vortec MP10, had that thing on here for about 7 or 8 months. But then I switched over to the Gyre, which was just a whole nother world of flow, in my opinion. So with that being said, I'm not saying one's better than the other because they're both fantastic pumps. But for as packed as this tank was and the scape blocking, open lines of water flow, the Gyre was the better solution for me in this tank. So if I could have started this tank over, I definitely would have used a Gyre to begin with and never looked back. Now, I've had a different situation where the scape was open, where the MP10's flow would be able to get through the tank without hitting any rocks or, blowing corals over. And of course, that would have been the better option. So when it comes to, my filtration and the equipment I use back there, that Tunze9004 Skimmer, fantastic. I can't say enough about that skimmer. Never felt me once. It clogged once or twice as far as the airline. Other than that, never had to service that thing. So fantastic skimmer. Highly recommend it for any tank that, it's rated to fit. I believe it goes up to 60 gallons if I'm not mistaken. Now, as far as the other equipment, the only thing I ever used was the Innovative Marine Mini Reactor, which I have a review video out on. So check that out if you haven't had a chance. It did its job, but was it needed? I would say no. I probably could have accomplished the same thing with using that media in a mesh bag. on one of my filter trays. So the last piece of equipment I used was going to be the algae scrubber. Now that algae scrubber I've raved and raved about. I'm telling you guys, one of the best decisions I ever used. It did the job, self-renewing, and not to mention, did a great job of growing pods, keeping my phosphates down, helping my nitrates, and just overall helping my filtration. So definitely plan on using the algae scrubber on any system I move forward. Definitely not gonna, have a reef tank without it at this point. Now there is one major part of my filtration that I forgot to mention, and it's gonna be my Seachem's pond matrix. Now I don't talk about this a lot, but it's a recap, so I gotta give you guys my honest opinion after using it on this reef tank for just about 2 years. Fantastic stuff. I don't think I ever would have been able to overstock this tank, maintain my nitrates, but this, minimalistic scape, roughly 25 pounds of live rock, actually dry base rock that turned live, without having that stuff. So, without a great source of surface area for my biological filtration to kind of mature and, turn into what it is now, I don't think this tank would have worked. So for those that are doubting Seachem's pond matrix, by all means, keep doubting it. But me, I'm going to keep using this stuff on every tank because it never breaks down. It never, loses its size and never clogs up. When you set it up the right way in a low flow environment with some kind of pre-filter medium before it, it definitely does a great job in your reef tank. So I'll definitely continue using that on my next tank along with the scrubber, and we're going to keep it moving on filtration. It never fails in this hobby. You'll be coasting along, having a good old time enjoying your tank, and then adversity will come and punch you right in the gut. That's a situation that puts many hobbyists to the test. Do you really want to do this? Do you want to get out while you're ahead? Had a few different, instances of that in this system. So the first one being the hair algae outbreak. Now this is debatable. Was it, the Marcos dry rock I started with leaching phosphates later down the road? Or did my system, have a huge phosphate issue and the rock absorbed it and then released it later? Who knows? But the bottom line is, had a huge hair algae outbreak, and it pretty much lasted for about 4 or 5 weeks. Tank was just disgusting. I was in here every week with a toothbrush and turkey baster trying to manually remove this stuff, but eventually it just stopped. So either it burned itself out, or I was able to kind of defeat it with phosphate absorbing media and just my good old manual labor. So, that was issue number one. I also had the second biggest issue, had to have been the ick outbreak. Now, of course, I did not quarantine. Let me go ahead and throw that out there. But I did, call myself trying to prevent any other issues by using the quick quarantine dip called Safety Stop. I don't believe they even make it anymore. Unfortunately, that stuff just did not work, guys. And for those that are saying, hey, you should have quarantined or you should have done this, keep in mind, the ick parasite can travel in on other things than fish. So if you're not going to quarantine your corals, cleanup crew, and your fish for the entire time, then you're always going to potentially introduce ick in your system. So now that that's kind of thrown out there, the way I was able to combat the ick was very simple. I didn't dose anything. I didn't feed anything special. I just improved the water quality, reduced the stress on my fish by removing damsels or anything that's going to cause drama in the tank, and just let them fight the ick off themselves. Over that entire time after that first ick outbreak, never lost another fish, never had any issues with ick again. So definitely was a serious learning lesson, but it was something I was able to overcome without any kind of myths in the hobby or medications. I was just able to deal with it and live with it in the tank. And the third biggest issue I had in my system had to have been the brown jelly outbreak. Now, for those wondering what that is, it's basically a bacterial infection that can occur in any kind of LPS coral, not just euphyllias. And it kind of comes from, either damage to the coral and low water quality, or both in some cases. My situation, I brought it on myself. I was mixing and matching different angelfish in my tank, flame angels, coral beauties, multi-bar angels, multicolor angels, all kinds of angels. But it wasn't until I introduced a midnight angel to my system to where I kind of bit the bullet, I guess, if you want to say. It went to town on all my euphyllias, damaged them, and definitely caused the brown jelly to outbreak in my system. So, I ended up losing multiple heads of gold torch, lemon lime torch. It just wasn't good at all. But ultimately, I was able to combat it by removing those corals, dipping those corals, turkey basting, blowing off that dead tissue outside of the tank, and I was able to save the remaining euphyllia. So that definitely was a situation that completely wiped out my first reef tank, and I'm glad that I was able to combat it and kind of fight it off in this system and, keep the tank going. So I would say those are the three major issues I had. But of course, there were a lot of different ones in between, whether it be a bad refractor meter or salinity issues or, just not maintaining my parameters the best way. But ultimately, I was able to get past all of those issues and keep this tank going. So after that first year went by and, I got past all my rookie mistakes and bumps in the road, it was time to finally buckle down and maintain my tank's parameters and keep things stable. So I kind of invested in, a little better test kits, went from API to Salifrid, and then eventually invested in some HANA checkers. So once I got an idea where my numbers were, I kind of asked myself the question, can I maintain a fully stocked reef tank with corals and fish without dosing, with just water changes? So, the mission began. It started off with 1 water change a week, and then it progressed to 2 water changes a week, and then it progressed to 3 water changes a week. And I did that for about 4 or 5 months, no dosing, and just maintaining my tank's parameters with water changes. And it worked, guys. Took a lot of work, but it worked. So with that being said, mission was accomplished, but I knew eventually I was wanting to go bigger. So I wanted to see how manipulating the water with, calc dosing or adding supplements would change things. So then I started using calc on my auto top off, start dosing alkalinity, and really start manipulating numbers in this system. Now I got to the point to where I was starting to keep things stable with that as well. And that's when really, the most growth happened in my tank. That's when the coral line boomed in the tank. That's when my SPS corals started growing. That's when things just started clicking the right way. So definitely consider this tank a great learning experience, especially when it comes to parameters and preparing myself to go bigger. So at this point, I know a lot of you guys are like, what the hell's going on in the tank? Corals are fading away to nothing. Things are disappearing. Well, if you guys have not been following the channel or you don't have any idea what's happening, this is it, guys. The JBJ is slowly being sold off one piece at a time, and it's time to finally talk about it and discuss the future plans. Now, for some people in this situation, they may decide to just keep all their livestock and corals and transfer it to the new tank. Hey, nothing wrong with that, not knocking you. But in my situation, at least for my plans, just won't allow it. I'm trying to start 2 new builds for you guys. The first one being a nano system, and the second one being a larger tank. And both of those systems cost money. So, this is an expensive hobby, and I look at this tank like an investment, a bank account. And when the time comes, if needed, you can make a withdrawal. That's pretty much what I did. But instead of just a small amount, I'm closing the account. I'm taking all the money out of this system that I've invested, and I'm putting it towards the next build for a fresh start. Now, there are definitely some benefits to starting over, getting that fresh start from the very beginning. The first one being, I can create a brand new and sterile system, with no ick, no parasites, nothing that I didn't want to transfer from the old tank to the new tank. So that in itself is a huge benefit. Now, the second thing that allows me to do is to dry skate my tank, plumb that tank without any, ticking time clock in my mind with keeping things alive or things dying before they transfer, or even worse, things dying after they transfer due to stress or ick outbreaks or whatever the case may be. So, definitely tons of benefits of doing it this way, and ultimately, it's the best for me. When it comes to selling livestock corals and just, aquariums in general, the number one rule is this: you're never going to get out what you put in. And you have to accept that before you move forward with ever wanting to sell your tank, especially if you want to do it quickly and efficiently. So with that being said, I'm going to walk you guys through my thought process of selling the JBJ, and it eventually led to me moving this tank in less than a week. That's everything. All the corals, all the livestock, the tank itself, and the equipment that I had included in the deal. Now, that's not including the lighting, which I'm keeping, the Maxspect Gyre 130, which I'm keeping, and my JBJ Auto Top Off. All of those will be going to the next build. So the first step for me was doing some research, checking out the LFSs around me, checking out their prices, and just seeing how well they were maintained, or if a lot of people actually like shopping there. Because whatever prices those LFSs offer corals were pretty much going to be the maximum amount that I would ever be able to charge, especially when it comes to, listing this tank on Craigslist or forums or whatever method I chose. You definitely have to beat the LFS. Otherwise, why would they come to you? Now, the second thing for me to do was going to be to check all of the local ads available, to see what kind of competition was out there. Was there better tanks? Was there bigger and better corals? Or was there someone that needed to move and was just giving corals away for pretty much pennies on the dollar? Once I was able to figure out what the competition was, I was able to set my upper limits, which was the LFS's prices, and my lower limits, which was everyone else on Craigslist, to make sure that I was still competitive and at the same time getting the most bang for my buck. So once all the research is done, it's time for step 3, putting myself out there, creating an ad. Now, the most important thing about an ad is making sure that you keep all the keywords in the title, so that way anytime someone's searching for saltwater, reef tanks, corals, livestock, fish tank, anything that has to do with the hobby, my ad pops up. Now, not to mention keywords, but also mentioning reduced. There's something about the word reduced, quote unquote, that makes people feel like you're desperate, or that makes people feel like they are getting the best deal, which also helps draw attention to your ad. So after those two things are done, it's all about staying on top of the list, meaning keeping your ad updated with fresh pictures, with the latest of what you have left, what's sold, what's not, and then always renewing the ad. I never let my ad go stale and go a couple of days without being touched. If it wasn't looked at, I would delete it, repost it again, basically make it seem like it's new every single day until I got some action. So once all that's done, now let me get to the fun part, the part that matters. How to get the most money. That's basically what it boils down to. For me, it's all about selling things individually. You never want to sell all the livestock all at once together, because people always try to lowball you or, get the best deal they can out of you. It's a lot better to sell things pieces at a time. 2 or 3 pieces here, 4 or 5 pieces there, your main pieces together maybe, but you never sell it all at once. I would much rather sell to 4, 5, or 6 people than one person getting it all and just trying to get it for really, really cheap. One major tip I can give you guys, always recommend the person bring a bucket, cooler, or something bigger than what they want to purchase, because it never fails. Once they see your tank, if it's in great shape, they're always going to want to purchase more than they thought. That's pretty much how it worked out for me every single time, and that's pretty much the main reason I was able to sell this tank so quickly. Not to mention staying in touch with people. If someone does good business with you and they like your tank, they get your corals home and the corals are doing fantastic, they're going to be interested in buying more. So I stayed in touch with those people, circle back around a few days later, said, hey, I still got this left, that left, pretty much down to the last corals. Do you want to get it? And it worked out perfect. They came back and picked up the rest. So that's pretty much the name of the game. Do honest, good business, give them good deals that are good for both of you all. Understand you're going to take a small loss, and at the same time, try to get the most money that you can. And in a nutshell, that's how you sell your reef tank in 6 days. So with all that being said, I think this is a pretty good point to put it into this video. And for anyone that's new in the hobby, can't recommend this tank enough. Perfect size, perfect footprint. For anyone new in the hobby that, doesn't want to deal with plumbing, but at the same time, want a tank big enough to where you can actually enjoy, create a nice scape, and just have a beautiful display tank for your home. So definitely couldn't recommend this tank enough. And for everyone else, hey, appreciate you guys watching this long, and definitely appreciate you guys watching this full series, roughly 50 or 60 videos over the last 2 years. Definitely learned a lot, grown a lot from it, and hopefully you guys too. So definitely going to end it here. So as always, hey, you guys like, comment, subscribe. You guys do what y'all do. Y'all be easy. Happy reefing.